Hi, everyone. I am Mina Tanrınan Demir, Product Manager in Azure Storage Group. And this session is about how you can leverage file services portfolio of solutions for your enterprise workloads. We're going to zoom in on Azure Virtual Desktop, SAP, Azure VMware solutions, and Windows Server file migrations for this session, mainly to call out latest investments in the space that could help you with those workloads. Before we go into depth of those, I wanted to overlay some of different solutions we have. Our goal is to meet your needs how you need them to be met. And you can leverage Azure Files or Azure NetApp Files, depending on your performance needs, other capability needs. Use what works for your use case, for your workload. And you can see the capabilities we have available in different scenarios in the slide. And we're going to be zooming in on specific workloads, mainly because of the new investments in those spaces. First up, Virtual Desktop. For Virtual Desktop, the file shares are most commonly used to store user profiles. FSLogic's user profiles is one solution. And this allows separating your storage from the rest of your application. So you can scale your storage independently to your user demand changes. And one of the key components of this scenario is being able to authenticate your users securely. And we provide different choices for you to pick from depending on what best works for your architecture. Before we get into authentication, where we have new investments into, I want to briefly describe when users may want to use Azure NetApp Files. For user profiles, Virtual Desktop solutions describe their demand in 4 categories. There's light demand with doing basic data entry tasks. Doing market research can be constituted as medium demand. Software engineers, content creators may require heavy demand, and graphic design or 3D modeling may constitute powerful demand. And under these categories, size of your user and number of users may have different performance requirements from storage perspective. So this is a summary table that you can find online about when you would choose which one, depending on your user demands of your own use case. For Azure Virtual Desktop, there are 3 Azure Active Directory sources you can pick from. First up is self-hosted Active Directory Controller. The second one is Azure Active Directory Domain Services. And the last one, which we have a latest announcement at, is Azure Active Directory Kerberos Authentication. So the differences are, in general, is about which domain you're joining from your client machine and what you have line of sight to, and whether you want to manage your own resources or not. So for self-hosted, it's essentially you set up your Active Directory on a VM you own and you have self-manage it. The note here is that the client you mount your file share from has to have line of sight to the domain controller. For Azure Active Directory Domain Services, it is a managed service alternative to your self-hosted Active Directory Domain Service. Azure Active Directory Kerberos allows Kerberos authentication on your Azure Active Directory. What this means is that, let's say you have an Office 365 subscription and you already connected your on-premises AD and you're syncing your identities to Azure Active Directory, you're taking advantages of already through OAuth or other solutions. You can now use the same setup for Kerberos authentication with Azure Files without additional configuration. In addition, what you can do is that your client, as long as it is Azure AD joined or hybrid joined, can access Azure File shares without needing line of sight to your on-premises domain controller. Please note that the current release requires hybrid identities, means the identities has to originate from an on-premises AD and sync to AAD. But otherwise, this setup is a good alternative in terms of not having to manage another domain controller. So in the preview, you will see that we have a simple checkbox for enabling this authentication mechanism. We wanted to make it as automated and simple for you as possible. And you can configure additional domain controller properties that allows to resolve your on-premises domain controller for experiences like managing permissions. So if you think of the scenario as I'm going to mount my file share and I'm going to access my files, you don't need these properties. If you are an admin configuring file share for the first time and you want to provide permissions to others, you will need to connect from an AD join machine, and you would need these properties set up on the storage account for that resolution to happen so you can manage permissions. And next up, we have our demo. So for our demo, I have already created a storage account and a file share underneath, and we're going to go configure Active Directory. And out of the options available to us, we're going to choose Azure AD Kerberos and check a checkbox. I'm not configuring domain properties this time because we're not going to manage permissions. We are only going to mount. And if you're an admin and you need to manage permissions, you need to do that part too. And in Active Directory app registrations page, we're going to go find our application. Let's refresh this. Here we go. And we're going to open the application registration to grant admin permission under API permissions menu. And you check a checkbox, it's instantaneous and it's done. And what we need now is a client we can connect from. I have an Azure VM already created. The only difference here is that it has Azure AD login enabled. Now we are going to mount it from a VM. First off, we are enabling Kerberos tickets in our VM. This is one method, which is updating group policy. On our public documentation, we have other options available. I already enabled it on this VM. And you see I haven't mounted it yet, and we're going to just run a net use command. It's going to use my logged in AAD credentials for mounting. And it's just going to, complete it successfully, and you see our share mounted. Please try, and looking forward to your preview feedback. As you have seen in the demo, in the preview, the experience is single click. There are a few configurations you need to do on the storage account and on the client side. Then you can mount with your logged in Azure AD credentials. And next up, we have SAP workload. For SAP workload, there are different considerations when it comes to databases and apps for SAP. In case of databases can take advantage of sub-millisecond latency with Azure NetApp Files, and scale-out capabilities with NetApp Files satisfy a lot of SAP use cases with databases. And in this space, we have two key new investments. First up, application volume groups, which help you encapsulate and structure your deployment so you don't have to worry about what data goes where, and that could be managed for you, and you can focus on your other needs. And then rapid snapshot restore capability with the snapshotting tools. And we're going to dig deeper into those. Another scenario for SAP is apps. You can use Azure NetApp Files or Azure Files. Azure Files' latest release, NFS 4.1, satisfies most application requirements, and especially with zone redundant storage capability, NFS 4.1 release has, application developers can feel confident that their data is replicated across zones and protected against zonal failures without having them manage any additional data protection for zonal failures. With respect to application volume groups for SAP HANA, this is a deployment volume that allows you to manage your storage. SAP may have data, log, shared, log backup, lots of different storage types. With this setup, you don't have to worry about which data goes where. And it allows calculating sizes and performance needs based on the memory size, reducing your management overhead needs. And also, it allows co-locating your storage with the VMs such that your storage can be residing close to your VM at a given time, optimizing your storage needs for minimal latency. And this physical placement allows different IP addresses for data and log volumes for optimized performance. Azure Application Consistent Snapshot tool supported for Azure Managed Disk and Azure NetApp Files allows for application consistent snapshots. In SAP HANA use case, database consistent snapshots can be readily restored for or cloned for other user purposes, and allows management capabilities for database backup administrators. And as we talked about, NFS 4.1 with Azure Files provides cost-effective performance storage option and can be a good option for SAP application storage. This is now GA in all premium file storage available regions, and it is fully managed POSIX compatible and provides consistent single-digit millisecond latency. And as we talked about, with support for a high availability through zone redundant storage, it provides high available storage solution. Next up, we have Azure VMware solution. For Azure VMware solution, our key announcement here is Azure NetApp Files as a data store. Why data stores? Provisioning storage independently of AVS allows scaling storage independently. With this, you do not need more compute resources to scale your storage needs. And in some cases, this allows up to 30% total cost of ownership reduction. Also, another use case is for both SMB and NFS access. Guest VM's access is supported in both Azure Files and ANF storage. You can choose whichever one you need based on your performance or other capability needs. With Azure NetApp Files data stores, you can connect securely via express route and can take advantage of some millisecond latency. In addition, you can hit 1500 megabytes per second throughput with multiple data stores. This is available from AVS resource provider by portal, CLI, or SDK. Next up, we have Windows for file server migrations. In this space, like we talked about in the other workloads, you can choose to use Azure NetApp Files or Azure Files depending on your performance or other capability needs. The key thing we want to call out here is that in the past year, we have done a lot of investments in Azure Files that our customers may have preferred to self-host their file servers on a Windows Server VM that they may choose to use Azure Files for instead, because we significantly improve total cost of ownership of various scenarios. First up, if you're not familiar, Azure Files supports standard tier and premium tier, which could be used in different performance scenarios. In the standard tier, it's a pay-as-you-go model, and transactions add to your bill in a different way. There may be some predictability cost because you may not know how many transactions your application may have. In a provision model where we have with premium files, it may be more predictable but more costly if you're not making a lot of transactions. Our guidance is to choose based on how you profile your workload and what you expect to occur. Then on the premium files tier, we have done lots of improvements to performance. With multi-channel feature, you can achieve increased throughput. We also remove the limits between egress and ingress separation. That way you can leverage a single throughput pool. This optimizes cost for a workload that is either read-heavy or write-heavy and had to plan in advance or over-provision to get the throughput needs they needed. In addition, for smaller shares, we have increased the IOPS available. For example, the IOPS was 400 gigabyte shares, and now it's 3,000. With these improvements, the performance of premium tiers have increased significantly at no additional cost. Next up is Azure File Sync. If you're not familiar, Azure File Sync is something you can install on premises that can tier your storage up to the cloud through Azure Files. And you can configure to leverage Azure File Sync as a cache, and you can configure how your storage will be optimized. This is useful for DR scenarios, easy migration, or hybrid storage needs. And it is super simple to configure, and it provides zero downtime migration capabilities. And what is new in this space is that with the improved TCO optimizations, we reduce the number of transactions Azure File Sync has to make to stay in sync with the cloud storage, thus optimizing and reducing TCO up to 16%. One example we have in this space is HPC pack migrations. HPC Pack is a batch execution software typically used by SMB file share storage, and we typically see customers hosting their own file servers on Windows Server as an SMB share for these solutions. With the optimizations I have mentioned, Azure Files provide a cost-effective performant file share option for this solution now. We have published an online guide. You can find the link in our references. And the characteristics of this workload is that it is throughput sensitive and may require sometimes keeping AD on premises. What this means is that customers may not sync their AD to Azure AD or Azure ADDS, in which cases, what do they do and how do they take advantage of file shares? We have released a capability called default permissions at the share level. So you can configure a default permission set for all authenticated users and then further configure per user permissions to secure more. So the default permission for all authenticated users removes the need to synchronize to the cloud, allowing you to keep your AD on premises. And with the improved performance, as I mentioned, as long as you enable multi-channel, provision for the right throughput your application your needs, optimize the number of files targeted to get the intended throughput, and optimize the block size based on what your application needs, you can get a very performant storage at a cost-optimal rate. Thank you very much for joining us. We hope this information was useful. More resources will be available, and please have a great day.